The table read was supposed to start at 10. It was February 1956, stage 12 at Fox Studios, and everyone who mattered was already seated. Producers in the back row, writers near the door, the director at the head. Marilyn arrived 7 minutes late, which meant she was early by her usual standards. She wore a cream sweater and dark slacks, her hair pulled back simply. When she walked in, the room did what it always did. It stopped. Not because she demanded it, but because her presence rearranged the air. She nodded to a few familiar faces and moved toward her assigned seat. That's when she noticed the 3 chairs pushed against the far wall, away from the table, and the 3 people sitting in them. Now, what I'm going to tell you today might surprise you. Before we go on, subscribe so you don't miss the stories Hollywood tried to bury, the moments that reveal who people really were when nobody was watching. The 3 actors were black, 2 men, 1 woman. They'd been hired for supporting roles, a porter, a maid, a doorman. Small parts, maybe 15 lines between them. But they were there, professionals, union members, called to the same table read as everyone else. Except they weren't at the table. They sat apart like students kept after class, scripts in their laps, eyes fixed forward. Nobody had said anything to them directly. Nobody had to. The assistant director had simply gestured to those chairs when they arrived, and they understood. This was how it worked. This was 1956. Marilyn sat down. She opened her script but didn't look at it. Her eyes went to those 3 chairs, then to the director. A man named Howard Gilmore, 48, successful, known for keeping productions on schedule and under budget. He had thick gray hair and the kind of face that seemed permanently set in mild irritation. He was talking to the lead actor, laughing about something, completely at ease. The room settled. Someone called for quiet. Gilmore stood. He welcomed everyone, thanked them for their time, made a joke about the coffee being terrible but free. A few people laughed. He started going through the scene list, explaining his vision, what he wanted from each beat. His voice was confident, practiced. He'd done this 100 times. When he mentioned the porter scene, he gestured vaguely toward the back wall without looking. "We'll get to your bits later," he said. Not unkindly, just matter of fact, like he was scheduling a delivery. Marilyn's hand tightened on her script. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She watched Gilmore move on, talking about blocking, about lighting, about pace. She watched the 3 actors against the wall, their faces neutral, professional. They knew better than to react. Survival in Hollywood meant knowing when to stay silent, when to smile, when to accept what couldn't be changed. She'd learned those same lessons. Different reasons, same cage. The read-through began. The lead actor started his lines, then the second lead, then a character actor who'd been in the business 30 years. Everyone read from the table, voices filling the room, scripts rustling, the rhythm of it, the ritual. When they reached the porter scene, Gilmore didn't call the actor forward. He simply read the porter's line himself, flatly, like he was reading a phone number, then moved on. The actor against the wall didn't flinch. His script stayed closed. 15 minutes passed. Marilyn had a scene coming up, but she wasn't thinking about her lines. She was thinking about those chairs, about the distance between them and the table, maybe 10 feet. Might as well have been miles. She'd sat in rooms where she wasn't wanted. She'd felt the weight of being decoration, of being tolerated but not respected. She knew what it meant to be in a space but not of it. And she knew something else. She had power here that those 3 actors didn't. Not because she deserved it more, because the system had decided her face was worth more than their dignity. When her scene came, she read her lines. Her voice was steady, professional. She hit the right notes. Gilmore nodded. Pleased. Good, he said. That's the tone. She didn't acknowledge the praise. She turned the page, found the maid scene 3 pages ahead. The maid had 2 lines, 2 sentences. The actress who'd been hired to say them sat against the wall, script open now, eyes following along silently. The read-through continued. Another 20 minutes, the room was warm. Someone opened a window. The sound of studio traffic drifted in. Trucks, voices, hammers on wood. Hollywood at work, building its dreams on assembly line precision. Marilyn waited. She'd learned patience the hard way. She'd learned that timing mattered more than volume, that the right moment could shift everything. She watched Gilmore, watched his rhythm, waited for a break in his momentum. It came when he paused to drink water. The room relaxed slightly, people shifting in their chairs, whispering to neighbors. Marilyn closed her script. She stood up. The movement was quiet, but in that room, at that moment, it pulled every eye. She didn't walk toward Gilmore. She walked toward the 3 chairs against the wall, toward the 3 actors who'd been hired but not included, who'd been called but not welcomed. She stopped in front of them. They looked up, confused. She didn't smile. She looked at the first actor, the man hired to play the porter. "You're Eugene Clark," she said. Not a question, a statement. She'd checked the cast list before she came in. He nodded, uncertain. "I'm Marilyn," she said, as if he didn't know. As if everyone in that room didn't know. "Would you read with me?" The room went completely silent. Not the silence of attention, but the silence of disbelief, of social rules being violated in ways that seemed impossible. Eugene looked at her, then at Gilmore, then back at her. He didn't move. The woman beside him, the actress hired for the maid, stared at Marilyn like she'd suggested something obscene. The third actor, younger, looked at the floor. Marilyn waited. She didn't repeat herself, didn't explain, just stood there, script in hand, waiting for an answer. 5 seconds passed. 10. The silence grew teeth. Finally, Eugene stood. Slowly, like a man defusing a bomb. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. His voice was careful, neutral. He held his script like a shield. "The name's Marilyn," she said. Then she turned and walked back to the table. Eugene followed. She could feel the room's shock like static electricity. She pulled out the empty chair beside hers, the chair saved for the actor playing her husband, who hadn't arrived yet, and gestured to it. Eugene hesitated. This wasn't just sitting at a table. This was sitting where white actors sat, where stars sat, where people who mattered sat. "Please," Marilyn said. The word was soft but absolute. Eugene sat. He placed his script on the table with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. Marilyn opened her script to the scene. "Page 43, she said. "Your character brings her the telegram. I'd like to hear how you'd play it." She looked up at Gilmore, who was standing frozen, water glass halfway to his mouth. "If that's all right with you, Howard." It wasn't a question. It was a dare wrapped in courtesy. Gilmore's face did something complicated. Surprise, anger, calculation. He was a practical man. He knew what Marilyn Monroe meant to a production. He knew what happened when she was unhappy. He knew somewhere in his gut that this moment would define more than just a table read. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Of course," he said. His voice was tight. "Let's hear it." Eugene looked at the page. His hands steadied. This was what he knew. This was what he'd trained for, worked for, dreamed of. Not just getting hired, but getting to do the job. To sit at the table and read the words and be treated like what he was, an actor. He found his line. He took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong and completely professional. He gave the porter dignity, gave him a moment of real human connection with Marilyn's character. He made 2 sentences matter. When he finished, Marilyn nodded. "That's good," she said. "Really good. I felt that." She looked at Gilmore. "Didn't you feel that, Howard?" Every eye in the room went to the director. He was trapped. Trapped by civility, by the presence of witnesses, by the fact that Eugene had just proven he could do the job. Gilmore's jaw worked. Then he nodded once, short and sharp. "Yeah," he said. "Good read." Marilyn turned to the other 2 actors still against the wall. "You should join us," she said. Not should as in maybe, should as in this is what's right. The woman looked at Eugene. Eugene gave the smallest nod. They stood. They walked to the table. 3 empty chairs materialized. Someone scrambled to bring them over, suddenly eager to help, to be on the right side of whatever was happening. The actors sat. They opened their scripts. They joined the table read. For the next hour, they read like professionals. When their scenes came, they read their lines from the table, like everyone else. Gilmore didn't read for them. He didn't dismiss them. He directed them, gave them notes, treated them like the actors they were. Not because he'd had a change of heart, because Marilyn Monroe had made it impossible to do anything else. She'd forced dignity into a space that had refused it. When the read-through ended, People packed up quickly. Nobody wanted to discuss what had happened. Nobody wanted to be asked to take a side. They filed out, scripts under arms, avoiding eye contact. Gilmore left without a word. The three black actors stood, gathering their things carefully, still not quite believing they'd been allowed to stay. Eugene turned to Marilyn, who was putting on her coat. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low, private. Marilyn looked at him. Her face was tired. She hadn't slept well in months, maybe years. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "You were hired. You should have been at that table from the start." She buttoned her coat. "I just made sure what should have happened. Still," Eugene said, "not many would have—" He stopped. They both knew what he meant. Not many with her power would have used it that way, would have risked the discomfort, the anger, the whispers. Marilyn nodded. She understood. "I know what it feels like," she said, "to be in a room where people think you don't belong." She picked up her purse. "We all deserve to be treated like we matter, like we're worth the same air." She walked out. The stage was empty now, silent except for the distant sounds of the studio. Eugene stood there with his script, with his 2 minutes of dignity at a table where he should have sat all along. He'd tell this story later, carefully, to people who'd believe it and people who wouldn't. But in that moment, he just stood in the space she'd created and felt what it was like to be treated like a professional. The film came out 8 months later. Eugene Clark got his name in the credits. Porter, it said. Uncredited became credited because Marilyn had insisted. Not publicly, not in the press, just quietly, in meetings, with producers who wanted her happy. The film did well. Not a classic, but solid. Nobody mentioned the table read. Nobody wrote about what happened on stage 12 that February morning. But word traveled. In the black acting community, in the careful networks where survival information passed hand to hand, people heard. They heard that Marilyn Monroe had stood up when she didn't have to, that she'd used her power for something other than herself. It didn't change Hollywood, didn't end segregation on studio lots, didn't open doors that remained locked for another decade, but it mattered to the people in that room. It mattered to Eugene Clark, who worked steadily for the next 20 years and told the story when it was safe to tell. Marilyn never mentioned it in interviews, never used it to burnish her image or prove her character. It wasn't performance. It was just a choice she made on a Tuesday morning when she saw something wrong and knew she could make it right. Just for a moment. Just for 3 people. Just enough to shift the weight of the world slightly toward justice. Years later, after her death, when people wrote about her, they focused on the obvious things. The beauty, the tragedy, the marriages, the films. They made her into mythology, into symbol, into cautionary tale. But the people who knew her, really knew her, remembered different things. They remembered moments like this, when she could have stayed silent, when she could have kept her seat and minded her business, when she could have accepted the cruelty of the system because it benefited her. She didn't. She stood up, she walked over, she said the quiet part out loud and made the room deal with it. And for one morning, on one sound stage, 3 actors got to do their job with dignity, because someone with power decided that's how it should be. Not for glory, not for credit, just because it was right. That's the thing about real courage. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand applause. It just shows up when it's needed and does what needs doing. Marilyn Monroe wasn't perfect. She struggled. She suffered. She made mistakes like everyone. But in moments that mattered, when she saw injustice she could address, she didn't look away. She didn't calculate the cost. She just acted. And on a cold February morning in 1956, 3 actors sat at a table where they should have been all along, because a woman who knew what exclusion felt like decided enough was enough. That's the story Hollywood didn't tell. That's the moment that got buried under starlet mythology and tragic endings. But it happened, and it mattered. If you want to hear more stories like this, the ones that reveal who people really were behind the cameras, subscribe, because there are dozens more waiting in the archives, in the memories of people who were there. Stories that show us not just who we were, but who we still need to be.